on November 11th. Happy Veterans Day to everyone. And I will begin by reading the statement reopen and public meetings about the Open and Public Meetings Act. As of November 5th, 2020, in accordance with Utah Code 52-4-207 sub 4, I have determined that conducting meetings of the Provo City Planning Commission with an anchor location, such as the council chambers, presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present there. These are the facts upon which I have made this determination. The World Health Organization has classified novel coronavirus disease, aka COVID-19, as a pandemic. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention state that COVID-19 is easily spread from person to person between people who are in close contact with one another. The state of Utah is currently subject to a public health emergency order which limits the size of public gatherings and which requires people to wear face coverings and follow social distancing guidelines. Utah County is currently listed as having a high level of coronavirus transmission. Physical distancing measures will be difficult to set up and maintain in the council chambers. Therefore, for the next 30 days, all meetings of the Provo City Planning Commission will be conducted entirely via electronic means. Planning Commission meetings are broadcast live and available later on demand at youtube.com/user/Provo Channel 17. Agendas and support materials are available at provo.org/planning commission. To make a public comment or to join a meeting via telephone, follow the instructions provided on the public notices of each meeting. To send comments to the Planning Commission members or weigh in on current issues, email them at dspublichearings@provo.org. That's signed by Dave Anderson on November 5th. Okay. All right, then. The agenda for this work meeting is to talk about the planning department's process. And Bill, I'm going to let you take over. You're muted.
Thank you. In a minute, I'll ask if there are any questions about the memo that was sent out. But before I do that, I want to just talk about some other larger concepts. So let's talk for a minute about development agreements versus contract zoning. Contract zoning is not legal, and contract zoning is when city staff or planning commission or city council say to a developer, well, if you'll give A, B, and C to the city, then we'll look favorably on your zone change. There's a very direct kind of quid pro quo going on. And the appearance of contract zoning makes the legal team and the city nervous. So it's been Provo's kind of methodology for many years that when a zone change comes before staff, planning commission, city council, it is appropriate for any of those groups to say, well, I've got these problems with your plan. I'd like the buildings broken apart. I'd like them staggered. I'd like them to face this way rather than that. And I'm hesitant to vote in favor of this zone change. How would you like to address that, Mr. Developer? And then to see what he proposes to mitigate those concerns. If he does address those concerns in a way that's acceptable to the planning commission members, then by all means recommend approval. But that also implies, if there's that kind of negotiation going on, that implies that there's going to be a development agreement. And it's fine for the planning commission or the staff to point out, okay, Mr. Developer, you've offered to make these changes in order to memorialize those things and make sure we're all understanding each other. We're going to recommend to the city council that be in the development agreement. Is that all right with you, or is that your understanding? And get a confirmation of that. Then we'd like to try to get the development agreement written out and signed before it goes to city council. So when you hear zone change requests, it's probably good to discuss the details of the concept plan and any corrections or changes or suggestions you might have before some kind of recommendation is made on the zone change. Now, once the city council adopts policy, they adopt that policy either through the general plan or amendments to the general plan, through adopting neighborhood plans, by amendments to the zoning ordinance. Once the city council adopts direction, the staff follows that direction until the direction is changed by the city council. So there are cases where the direction that we're going starts to become questioned, and that's fine. And if the planning commission starts to feel a certain level of discomfort with that direction, it's totally appropriate for the planning commission to ask the city council to take another look at whatever that issue is. And staff would then, prepare a way for the planning, for the city council to most efficiently, reconsider that issue. And I think the city council would be very interested in receiving that kind of input from the planning commission. City council reads very carefully the planning commission records of report of action, and they frequently ask questions about what the planning commission discussed, the questions they asked, and those types of things. If that makes sense, you don't have any questions about that, we can go into the memorandum. I'm going to walk through the flow chart on the screen. Can you all see the flow chart?
Yes.
Before we go to that, are there any specific questions that have come about since reviewing that memorandum?
I'm not seeing any raised hands. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, so this walks through the process that the memorandum tried to describe verbally. I know it's hard for you to read the boxes, so I'll read them to you. This is where the process starts: a land use application, land use proposal here. Then the application is submitted over the internet to the city. The fee is collected, and then the application, the case file is created, and the planner is assigned. And at that point, it's circulated to the coordinator's review committee. So this says CRC review. So these are all the different staff members from the different departments that review every project. The staff varies, but there's always a representative from planning, and there's a representative from engineering, and from fire, and from power. The CRC group gives its review, and this says CRC comments. The comments are then sent to the applicant, and the staff has 2 weeks to turn that around. Usually there are requested changes in that set of red lines, that set of markups. So this says changes requested. This says applicant submits revisions. And then it has another CRC review. When the revisions come in, there's another CRC review, another 2 weeks for staff to review it, and then comments go back out to the developer again. This is the spin cycle I refer to in the memorandum. Frequently, it happens that when the CRC comments go out, 80% are addressed and it gets resubmitted. Sometimes that doesn't get us where we need to go. If those remaining 20% are minor and staff's not worried about those getting done, then we'll go ahead and send it on to the planning commission. And that's why you have so many recommendations that say, please approve this subject to all the requirements of the CRC committee. If there are substantial things and the staff needs to see those before we move it on, that can go through several revisions or many revisions, depending on the applicant's willingness to address all of those concerns. When we get accused of how long a project has been in process, that it's been in a process too long, it's very easy for us to run a timeline. And every time we have run a timeline, it has turned out that between 70 and 75% of the time a project has been in process, between 70 and 75% of the time, the staff has been waiting for revisions to come in from the applicant. The other 25 to 30% of the time, the ball's in our court. We're doing our review. That's very typical. Now, we've got room for improvement. We're not perfect. We've been working very hard to make sure the staff puts all major issues on the table within the first 2 reviews, because that's very frustrating to a developer to be 3 or 4 or 5 reviews into a project and then have the staff come up with something new that is something that's very important, very much a deal breaker to the developer. So we've worked very hard on staff getting all issues on the table within 2 reviews. Once the different departments have signed off on that review, it says final approval, and then moves on through the process. This says neighborhood meeting. We've left out where in here design review committee would take place, but design review committee would take place somewhere in this area. Then it says public hearing required. Place the item on the agenda and get the noticing out. Staff report gets written. We hold the public hearing. A report of action is written. And then we close the file.
Hey, Bill, could I add something there?
Sure.
Back to that to review, under Bill's direction of doing that, Public Works is taking that serious, and there is a project that we had come in, I think, on a 3rd review, and we missed something, and then we were asking them to modify their drawing. We are paying for that modification out of our Public Works monies because we didn't catch it on the 2nd review. So just to kind of back that up, but that's a serious thing.
Thank you, David.
So question, if you don't catch it on the 2nd review, is that always the case that it then becomes the city responsibility?
Not always, but this one was clearly our fault, and it was just a clear case that we missed something, and it made it so they would have been redesigning a project, and so we're paying for that redesign cost. But yeah, I guess it's a case by case, but it really is a serious issue.
It really is very much case by case. It depends on a lot of different factors. We may go back to the developer and have some negotiation over that, or we may just put the bill. It all depends on the circumstances and the magnitude of that. So that's the general process that we follow. Now, I talked a lot in the staff report about zone changes and how those are kind of a different and unique animal, because zone change is highly discretionary, because the city council can ultimately say, hey, we think this is a great project, but we think the timing is wrong. It's premature, and we're going to deny it for that reason. That would be completely legal, even if they met all the requirements of the zone they were asking for, even if it follows the city's general plan. It would be completely legal for the city council to make a determination like that. Because of the subjectivity to zone changes, and especially because of how much multifamily we already have in Provo City, the staff works with the developers on a plan that is something we feel comfortable about recommending approval to. You're going to see an item on your agenda tonight that has been over a year in plans going back and forth between the developer and the applicant, and finally it got to the point where the staff said, you know what, you really need to kind of start over and do something different with your architecture, make sure your landscaping is more central to the project, your open space are a significant portion of that. And once those things were done, we got to a point where staff was willing to recommend approval. Because of that project and the D.R. Horton project you heard a couple weeks ago, the staff's going to change that process and outlook. We're not going to spend a year negotiating with the developers. We just don't have the bandwidth to do that. We have too few planners and too many projects. On the 2nd review, if they haven't met the things the staff has asked them to do, if it doesn't meet the requirements of the zone, we're going to send it on to you and the city council with a recommendation for denial. Because we just don't have, it burns a lot of staff time to spend a year going back and forth, just trying to get the developer to follow the requirements of the zone, first of all, and then follow kind of generally accepted good principles of urban design, sound design principles. So just be aware you may be getting more projects in front of you with recommendations for denial. Any other questions about the memorandum or about process in general at Provo, about your role as planning commission? Any projects that you've seen lately you're still puzzled over?
I don't believe I have any questions, but just some things to talk about. Some of them have been frustrating for me, others not really, but maybe a couple of general comments to set the stage. I haven't been able to think of a project that we've seen as a commission that was still in any kind of a pliable state. The applicants, by the time that they get to us, and I think it's to your point, Bill, and incidentally, I'm not sure that I know exactly what I think a solution might be or an improvement, but when they go through the number of iterations, sometimes that's necessary to get a design put together to have a recommendation from staff. Then by the time that project hits our agenda, they have a lot invested in it. Likewise, staff has a lot invested in it. And as we talk about potential changes, there's really not been much of a willingness, I think, on the part of staff or applicants to have that kind of dialogue, at least not typically. So that makes me wonder a few different things. I wonder how necessary it is for the Planning Commission to be involved with project plan reviews and that type of a thing, day in and day out. Process that I work with, Planning Commission's not part of that. You got CRC, you've got the DRC in Provo, you've got otherwise staff. So, instead of having the Planning Commission involved in some kind of land use authority capacity there, does that just simply become the staff level approval, maybe of some type? I think I would prefer that as to, again, seeing things that really, and I think appropriately, when they get to the point to where there's been that kind of time and effort put into things and they get to a Planning Commission agenda, I don't like talking about changes. That hasn't stopped me from doing it, but I completely understand why there's the reluctance to change, or certainly to go a different direction with a recommendation, to deny something or that type of a thing. So maybe by way of another thought. So again, just to reiterate, one thought is it appropriate for the Planning Commission to play a role in reviewing those types of things?
So, Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, maybe just one other thought to throw this out there, and then I'll
Okay.
be quiet for a minute. If so, I think it would be helpful to maybe be involved earlier on, even maybe before a project does have all of the I's dotted and T's crossed. Collaboration is the word that comes to mind. So either being involved earlier on or maybe being involved less, I think would be good for applicants, the staff, neighbors, and so forth.
So a few weeks ago, you made a similar comment about project plans and whether Planning Commission should be involved in that. So actually, we took that to heart, and we're working on code amendments right now. Gary McGinn's group, Robert Mills, is working on code amendments right now, so the project plans won't come to the Planning Commission. I think the Planning Commission is still going to need to see the concept plan that goes along with zone changes because that's such an integral part of the zone change. And there's no way to take planning commission out of that loop, out of that process because of state law. I would hope the planning commission feels like you can make suggestions, changes, corrections to concept plans, because personally, I don't care if there's been 143 concept plans before it gets to you. It's only a concept plan. We have taken away all of the engineering you have to do for preliminary project plan and construction plans and all those kinds of things for the buildings. It's still pretty high level drawings. And so I think the planning commission should feel okay with making suggestions on the concept plan. And on the issue of 143 plans, developers will again make that comment that we're on plan, whatever. And usually the staff is seeing 3 or 4 or 5, although the developer has done 20 or 30. We've only seen 3 or 4 or 5. And that's how the process works. I've been impressed with the Planning Commission's ability to listen to the public input, read the letters that you all receive, and then make suggestions in the meeting that plays off of that input you have received. And I think the Planning Commission is very valuable in that regard. And I would hate to lose that. I think you do that well, and I think it's helpful. Any other staff would like to add anything else, or planning commissioners, anything else? Dave, anything else?
Maybe to jump in, sorry, I completely agree with that. As a planning commissioner, acting on a zone change without having a concept plan accompanying it, I really appreciate the way that in your memo you stressed, just exactly what happens when a zone change is approved and how that really is the meaningful bite at the apple. So I certainly agree with what you're saying now. On that part of the process, the zone change and the concept plan, still, and truly, I want to be clear, people complaining about staff taking time and the effort that it takes to get through staff before things get to a planning commission agenda. I think that's universal. I think you hear that in any community. And I completely agree as well with what you said, Bill, that very rarely is that substantiated. I think that's almost always on the fault of an applicant for taking time that it might take to get things discussed in a public meeting. But still, again, sooner's better. And I won't belabor the point, just because, again, I think everybody's a little bit more willing to make changes and that type of thing earlier on. And I appreciate what you said about development agreements. That concept for me, relative to the LaFontaine project, is, that concept plan was critiqued. That was a concept plan, right? Or was that a project plan? That was still concept, yeah. So the different things that different commissioners were pointing out as changes that they wanted to see. What you're saying is that we maybe would have been better off that night continuing that and articulating those thoughts, as to what we wanted to see changed before we would make a recommendation, and seeing that memorialized in an agreement that would accompany the planning commission recommendation to the city council.
Yes, and the more clearly you can articulate those things that you'd like to see changed, the easier it makes it for the developer to do those things. But yes.
I really appreciate that as well. I think that makes that conversation meaningful. I think that makes it so that, conversations that we have in those public hearing, public comment kind of settings, then it's genuine, as we talk about things that a developer could be held to. I think that's a great approach.
Oh, so we will be coming before you with some changes to the code that will take away some of these administrative things. But again, that'll be done by Gary McGinn's group. we can, I guess we could in study sessions bring to you projects that have been kind of languishing, projects that we've been trying to get changes made, projects that have been going back and forth. I don't want to clog up agendas with running those things past you because your agendas are already so full, but maybe we could do a better job showing those, giving you a pre-look in study sessions or something like that.
That could be
Yes.
helpful. I have a
The
question.
process is always evolving, and if you have ideas on what we could do better, we're certainly open to it.
Bill, what percentage of the projects are not acceptable by the end of the second full review?
What would you just, if you got other staff here in the room, what would y'all say?
I would say, unfortunately, it's the majority of what we receive still have pending comments either from us or Public Works after a couple of reviews. They just don't get all the things that we've listed.
So we would expect the majority of those things coming to us to be staff recommends no.
Well, like Bill alluded to earlier, oftentimes they're not major concerns. So we're willing to say we've gotten far enough where we can recommend approval with the condition that we finish out these remaining concerns through staff review.
And that tends to happen on project plans, and we're in the process of taking that off your desk. But
in the other case, with a zone change, if there's concerns that we feel haven't been addressed through a couple of reviews, yeah, you may be getting more recommendations to recommend denial to the city council.
I think that's the really key part, Lori, is that staff has spent so much time in the past trying to work with applicants to get to a point where everybody would feel comfortable coming to the planning commission and the council with a positive recommendation. No developer or applicant that I know of wants to go with a negative, with a recommendation of denial. But I think that that's definitely something that you all might be seeing more frequently in the future. And hopefully that has a lasting effect to be able to kind of convey that message to the development community that they pay attention to these comments and make sure that they get addressed properly.
Okay. Other commissioners' comments? Lisa?
I was just wondering if along that same line, maybe having a concept plan approval be tied in with the zone approval, so it's not two separate items, so that we don't approve one without the other. I don't know if that helps to streamline things at all.
Well, generally they're presented together and they are two different applications, right? So
I just note that the last, with the La Fontaine again, we were comfortable with the zone change, but not with the parameters of the project. And so there was all that extra discussion, whereas if they were connected, we just would have stalled the project until we were happy with everything.
And I think that's what Bill referred to in his memorandum of, if there are, like the La Fontaine's a perfect example. There are a lot of issues there that we noted with the concept plan. And because they're read in together, to not make a recommendation on the zone change, especially for approval, until that concept plan is to a point where you guys are comfortable with it.
And my understanding is that the city council denied that. Was that yesterday?
That's
That was
correct.
last night. That's correct, by a vote of 6-1.
Okay.
Was that because there were so many things that we weren't comfortable with, or what was their reasoning?
I think it had a lot to do with the history of the project that was conveyed most in detail in the first staff report that went out on that, which was months and months ago. This first staff report talked a lot about the history of the creation of 3900 North and the single family lots on the north side of that, and trying to separate the single family neighborhood from commercial and multifamily traffic. And Dave Stoll was intimately involved in all of those negotiations and meetings and discussions. And by the time he rehearsed to the council a lot of that history, I think they felt persuaded. Is that about right, Aaron?
Yeah, that combined with the overwhelming majority of the neighborhood against it, I think sways the council vote in that direction.
And I was going to say too, I wonder if maybe it could be a good idea to bring a concept plan to the Planning Commission before the rezone, maybe early in the process, and get through that that process to give the Planning Commission opportunity to comment on that. Obviously, what type of zone and everything would be part of that, but that way we don't end up getting the rezone moving forward to the city council before the concept plan, because once the rezone gets approved, things
We've lost a lot of leverage.
yeah.
Could part of that just be a study session item rather than an actual
Yeah.
item?
Yeah.
Just because it's so informal.
Yeah. And the downside of that is that at that point in the process, Planning Commission wouldn't have the benefit of the neighborhood input yet. That would still be forthcoming, but it would give you a chance to start seeing it before you're actually asked to make a ruling.
And those could be on the items that we think are a little bit more.
We have a couple of hands. So, Dave, I think you, and then Brian.
Boy, the more that I think about it as we talk about it, I really like the suggestion that we do spend some time in work sessions talking about things. And here's how I kind of picture maybe that forum unfolding. By the point that we would talk about it, staff would have been through probably a couple of iterations at least with an applicant. Staff would have some opinions about what's best. The applicant might have some opinions about what's best, and we just put it out on the table and we're able to talk through it. And it's informal, there's no action, but it's just a conversation. And I think that would be beneficial for a lot of people in a lot of different ways.
Okay.
I agree. Brian?
Yeah, that was my thoughts was, I thought the concept plan approval carried more weight than it did, especially in that LaFontaine project. To have the concept plan first, to me, makes a lot of sense before the zone change, because then we keep our leverage. And there's been a lot of times, maybe just an insight from the developer side that I've seen in my career, is the developers a lot of times will say, let's just ignore that red line. Let's take it to Planning Commission and see if they notice. And they'll try and sneak things through, and they try and push things through, and it feels shady and it feels frustrating. So I think to be able to stop them and say, no, there's still red lines out, for us to know there's still red lines out, I think would definitely raise a lot of red flags for me, knowing that developers are going to take whatever they can get. And so if they can sneak something through, they're going to take it. So.
Yeah, I think we could make these work meetings productive in that way.
Right.
Okay.
One last thing on that though, I would like, it would be my hope that the work meetings can also be used to sharpen the saw, that we can dream a little bit and maybe come up with ways to streamline the process and make it easier for the developers, make it easier on us, so that we don't have so much conflict in the meeting.
Okay.
Maybe to
Thank
go
you.
off of that note, sorry. I think that one way that we could be a little bit more effective and to help the Planning Commission with some of these things is maybe we should be taking a look at some more design standards. So you have something that you can actually gauge and something codified that you can fall back on to say, this is why we're recommending these suggested changes.
Okay. Lisa?
I was just thinking of how this bringing the plan to a work meeting played out in previous projects that we've seen. And I loved that we had seen the BYU music building before they came to a meeting. And I thought it was interesting that everything we said we were concerned with, they didn't do anything about. And so then when they brought it to us, we were still starting from where they were when we said, these are actually some red flags for us. These are some concerns for us. And so we still had the same concerns that hadn't been changed, but at least we'd already honed in on them. So we didn't have to rehash the whole thing in a public meeting, or even that first meeting. We just said, we've already told you these are our concerns. If you haven't changed anything, then we can't hear you. And I don't know, maybe that was a poor thing to do, but it felt like it saved us time going through it one more time in a public meeting, because we already knew it didn't meet the standards of even submission.
Okay. Brian?
To echo what Robert said, the big thing I'm learning in this is the level of context you have helps to make a decision, both yes or no. And when there isn't good context, that's when things really become difficult to say no, but maybe we don't feel quite right, or we're not sure why. There's a project we're going to look at tonight that it clicked for me about previous projects, that if we had a little more context, both in development and in future, and especially as we get into these farmland areas on the west side, to have some extra context will help make decisions. But when we don't have that context, saying, well, I don't really like the project, isn't really strong enough, I feel, for the developer to say, well, I'm going to go change it then. But to say that, well, you know what, after you develop, beyond you, there's another 4,000 acres that are also going to develop, so you need to put in a bigger road. To have the context there really, to me, shows that we're developing for the entire city, not just the parcel we're discussing in that moment.
That's a really good point, Mr. Henry. Concerning the west side, a lot of time and effort and more time went into creating that west side land use map. And we probably need to do a better job as staff when you get a west side proposal. You're going to be getting another one soon, to go into some of that background and context, because a lot of water has gone under the bridge to create that map.
Just for instance, we heard a project at Center and Geneva a few weeks ago, and it was a no-brainer for the zone change because the context around it was something different. We knew what that was. But on others like the DR Horton, who knows what's going to go on next door? Who knows what's going to happen down the road? And obviously we don't know, but to have a little more forecasting of what those things could be. I'm working on something that I've talked with Shannon Ellsworth about. I want to just share it probably with Robert when I get it done, but just some ideas that could help us have a little bit more forecasting ideas. So anyway.
Okay, good.
On the topic or issue of the concept plan, so when we bring a concept plan to you ahead of the actual request, that'll go out in the staff report. So you'll have a chance to look at it, and staff will give you some background and context on that through some kind of just memo or something with that. So you're not seeing it for the first time when you walk into a study session. It helps me a lot to see something ahead of time and have some time to think about it, than see it for the first time and be asked to react. So we'll give you a heads up by sending that to you along with staff reports.
Yes, and then, like, especially any things that are red flags for the city, to bring
Yes.
those to our attention would be super helpful.
Okay.
Okay, Dave. It's still muted.
Thanks. Just to follow up on what Bill said, even maybe just at times to bring concept plans, not that this hasn't happened in the past, but maybe more often bringing concept plans forward with a recommendation to continue, so that, at least have the public hearing and can get that input, and again, kind of have that dialogue about, these are the recommendations that staff has made. We take the public's input and we can weigh in at that point, with the idea that in all likelihood we're not going to act that night. Don't want to complicate things, but just another thought.
Interesting. Okay. More comments? Staff have any more input?
Yeah, just that once again, that we've been following basically these processes for a long time, but I do not think that they're perfect. So any suggestions the Planning Commission comes up with that you think would help, we're certainly open-minded to. There's always room for improvement.
Okay. Brian?
I know we've only got like 2 or 3 minutes left. Some quick clarification. Obviously, we recommend projects favorably, unfavorably. We can continue a project. There's another city I've dealt with that will table projects. Could you just give us a quick rundown on the actions we take and what they mean legally and officially?
I'm not sure I understand the difference between tabling and continuing. Mr. Anderson, if you have some knowledge on that, please chime in. But to me, those would mean the same thing. Usually, if an item is, the concerns are pretty finite, the Planning Commission will continue the item to the next meeting or to a specific date. If the concerns voiced seem to be not so much nebulous, but harder maybe for the applicant to address, looks like they may take more time for the applicant to address, then it's continued without a date certain. We put it back on when the staff and the developer feel like this is ready to move forward again. Of course, on administrative items, you're the decision-making body, and on legislative, you're just the recommending body. But again, the Planning Commission, the City Council does pay close attention to your recommendations.
Okay. Lisa has another comment.
I was just wondering if knowing the history of the city council's involvement with a project or an area would also be some helpful contextual information for us to get in a staff report, just so we understand why it was denied or why something was approved or what some prerequisites were for a development in the past. I just, once again, going back to the LaFontaine project, it's always helpful to know why we're looking at something again, so that we don't just keep pounding the same things into it.
Okay.
Okay. Well, good. We're at 5:43 and staff wanted us to be able to close at 5:45. I'm ready to say we're done here and we'll see everybody back at 6.
Thank you very much.
That's great.
Okay.
Thanks. Hey, Bill.
Yes.
To the November 11 Provo City Planning Commission meeting. I'm going to go ahead and read a statement relative to the Open and Public Meetings Act as of November 5, 2020, in accordance with Utah Code 52.4.2074. I have determined that conducting meetings of the Provo City Planning Commission with an anchor location such as the council chambers presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present there. These are the facts upon which I have made this determination. The World Health Organization has classified novel coronavirus disease, aka COVID-19, as a pandemic. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention state that COVID-19 is easily spread from person to person between people who are in close contact with one another. The state of Utah is currently subject to a public health emergency order, which limits the size of public gatherings and which requires people to wear face coverings and follow social distancing guidelines. Utah County is currently listed as having a high level of coronavirus transmission. Physical distancing measures will be difficult to set up and maintain in the council chambers. Therefore, for the next 30 days, all meetings of the Provo City Planning Commission will be conducted entirely via electronic means. Planning Commission meetings are broadcast live and available later on demand at youtube.com/user/Provo Channel 17. Agendas and support materials are available at provo.org/planning commission. To make a public comment or to join a meeting via telephone, follow the instructions provided on public notices of each meeting. To send comments to the Planning Commission members or weigh in on current issues, email them at dspublichearings@provo.org. Signed November 5, 2020 by Dave Anderson and Bill Pepperoni. Okay, next we will take a roll call, but before that, we anticipate tonight not starting any new agenda items after 9:45. I also note that any items on the agenda that are starred are legislative in nature and require action on the part of the municipal council. And for the other items, the Planning Commission will be making a decision tonight. That being said, we'll go ahead and take a roll call. I'm not sure if there are 5 or 6 of us present here tonight. Let's go ahead and start with Commissioner Urquiaga.
Laurie Urquiaga, no conflicts.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Daniel Gonzalez, I might have a conflict on 10 and 11.
Okay. Commissioner Jensen.
Lisa Jensen, no conflicts.
Commissioner Henry.
Brian Henry, one conflict tonight. Item 8 is being proposed by my uncle. So I'll be abstaining from participating in hearing number 8.
Okay, thank you. I'm Dave Anderson. I have no conflicts. And with that, we're going to go ahead and dive into item number 1. The Community and Neighborhood Services Department requests an ordinance text amendment to add the open space preservation and recreation zone to the Provo City Code as Chapter 14.33 and to amend Provo City Code Section 152082C relating to supplemental landscape requirements and Provo City Code Section 143875 relating to signs permitted within the OSPR zone. Mr. Weaver.
Thank you. I would like to present items 1 and 2 together, if that's okay.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and read in item 2 real quick then. The Community and Neighborhood Services Department requests zone changes for various city parks from public facilities to the open space preservation and recreation zone. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, the proposed ordinance amendment is to preserve public open space, parks, recreation, and natural areas. Staff worked very closely with our Parks and Recreation Department and our city ombudsman on drafting this zone and looking at the parcels of land that we would like to rezone. The general plan encourages ordinances that would protect plant life and preserve habitats for wildlife. The general plan also encourages preserving parks within each neighborhood. The adoption of this zone text and rezones of these properties would allow for these areas to be protected. Currently, a lot of our parks are primarily, most of them are zoned public facilities. Within that zone list, a wide variety of permitted zones. Some of the permitted zones are, you can see, are listed on the left of the screen. Within the open space preservation recreation zone, the permitted uses would be cemeteries, city-owned community garden, conservation grounds, golf course, particularly in the East Bay neighborhood, parks, recreation